They thought your silence meant you stopped caring. But what they never expected is that your silence would become the very thing they feel the loudest. Not because you're punishing them, not because you're playing games, not because you're trying to control anything, but because you finally chose the one thing they never believed you would choose: your own peace. And nothing shakes a person more deeply than realizing they no longer have access to the version of you they once took for granted. There comes a moment in every heartbreak, every confusing connection, every on and off dynamic, where your soul gets tired, tired of explaining yourself, tired of justifying your worth, tired of giving someone access to a heart they don't know how to handle. And so you step back, not to punish, not to manipulate, not to make them chase. You step back to breathe, to hear your own thoughts again, to feel your own energy again, to reconnect with yourself after losing pieces of who you were, trying to hold someone else together. Silence isn't revenge. Silence is self-restoration. But your ex, the person who thought you'd always reply, always reach out, always fix things, feels that silence in a way they never expected. At first, they assume it's temporary. Give it a few days. They tell themselves they always come back. But something feels different this time. Your energy feels different. Your absence feels different. Your silence has a weight they can't ignore. Because this time, your silence isn't angry. It's calm. And calm silence is the most powerful silence there is. It means you've shifted inside. It means the spell broke. It means you're not operating from emotion anymore. You're operating from clarity. And clarity is the one thing they never wanted you to reach. They start replaying conversations, moments, choices they made, words they said that hit you harder than they realized. Because silence creates space, and space creates accountability. And accountability is something a lot of people aren't ready for until it's staring them straight in the face. Your silence forces them to sit with what they've done, not because you're trying to teach them a lesson, but because you finally stopped carrying the emotional weight. For both of you, you're not fixing, you're not smoothing things over, you're not chasing closure, you're choosing yourself. And suddenly, they feel it: the shift, the loss, the absence, the reality that you were the source of so much connection, warmth, stability, and consistency that they never fully appreciated. They thought silence meant you gave up, but your silence isn't giving up. Your silence is growing up. It's stepping into your worth and letting distance do what your words could never do: reveal truth. Because distance reveals connection. Distance reveals value. Distance reveals regret. Distance reveals fear. But most of all, distance reveals what someone really feels when they can no longer hide behind comfort and convenience. And now, they're feeling everything. Not because you're trying to trigger anything, but because your absence finally removed the noise they used to drown out: their own guilt, their own confusion, their own responsibility. And the truth becomes clear. They don't miss the attention. They miss the connection. They don't miss the validation. They miss the presence. They don't miss having someone. They miss having you. Because healing silence isn't empty. It's reflective. It's grounding. It's stabilizing. And they can feel that you're not in the same place anymore. They can feel that you're becoming someone who no longer accepts crumbs, inconsistency, or emotional shortcuts. Your silence is you returning home to yourself. And when you return to yourself, you stop orbiting around people who never learned how to hold your heart. And that right there, is what they feel more deeply than they will ever admit out loud. Your silence is not punishment. It's not a tactic. It's not a trick. It's not a strategy to make them chase you. It's something deeper, quieter, holier. It's you returning to yourself. Because before the silence, there was noise, there was confusion, there was emotional exhaustion, masked as trying harder. There were nights you were breaking while pretending to be fine. There were moments you accepted crumbs and called it connection. There were days you carried the responsibility of both hearts while they carried none. Silence became necessary the moment you realized you were losing yourself, trying to keep them. And when someone pushes you to the point where you must choose between your peace and their presence, your heart always knows which choice saves you. And so you step back, not to teach them a lesson, not to make them afraid, not to manipulate the bond. You step back because your nervous system couldn't survive another cycle of almost, maybe, and someday. You step back because you finally understood that access to you is a privilege, and not everyone knows how to hold it. And silence is the doorway back to your emotional safety. But here's the part no one likes to admit. Your silence does something to them too. Not because you intended it, not because you hoped for it, but because absence reveals truth that presence once hid. When you stop explaining, they start thinking. When you stop overgiving, they start noticing. When you stop carrying the entire emotional weight of the connection, they start feeling the collapse of their half. Because when you were present, they got used to ease. They got used to comfort. They got used to your softness, holding up everything they didn't want to face. When you withdraw that energy, not out of spite, but out of self-protection, something shifts inside them. The silence you choose becomes the mirror they can't escape. It shows them what your presence was really doing. It shows them how much of themselves they projected onto you. It shows them how much emotional stability you carried for two. Silence reveals the imbalance they pretended not to see. And here's the truth most people don't understand. When you stop reaching out, you remove the cushion that protected them from their own reality. You remove the distraction that kept them comfortable. You remove the emotional shield that prevented them from confronting their responsibility. Your silence forces them into their own mind. And that is where the truth hits hardest. Because suddenly, there's no message to soothe their ego, no reassurance to calm their insecurity, no emotional labor to validate their decisions, no easy access to your compassion to soften their guilt. And without all of that, they finally feel the weight of losing you, not because the silence is meant to hurt them, but because the silence reveals what your presence was worth. And slowly, they begin to realize you weren't asking for much. You were giving more than they ever acknowledged. You were trying in ways they never understood. You were patient beyond what was fair. You were loving them in a way they weren't ready to receive. And now, they feel it. Your absence is the first boundary you've ever set, and it exposes every part of them they tried to hide. Their fear of intimacy, their fear of depth, their fear of accountability, their fear of loving someone who requires emotional honesty. Your silence doesn't trigger them because you're withholding. It triggers them because for the first time, they're left alone with the truth. They lost someone who cared for them in a way they weren't mature enough to appreciate. They lost someone who showed up with depth. They weren't equipped to match. They lost someone who loved them fully when they only knew how to love halfway. And silence makes this real. It makes it undeniable, unavoidable, uncomfortable, because now they can't pretend you'll always be there. They can't assume you'll wait forever. They can't rely on your emotional strength to mask their emotional weakness. Your silence reminds them that you are not permanent in a place where you were never valued. And slowly, in the space where you used to be, they feel the shift. They feel the loss. They feel the distance. They feel the void they created, not because you walked away to make them regret anything, but because healing yourself removes you from places that don't deserve you. You're not silent to punish. You're silent to breathe, to reset, to regulate, to return to your own heartbeat. And in that silence, something powerful happens. You start to see clearly. You start to feel lighter. You start to understand your worth. You start to separate their absence from your value. And they start to see what they took for granted. They start replaying moments they dismissed. They start questioning why they didn't try harder. They start realizing you were the one person who loved them with intention. And that hits different when the noise fades. Silence is not manipulation. Silence is transformation. It's choosing yourself after choosing them for too long. It's healing after hurting quietly. It's reclaiming your peace after losing it in someone else's chaos. And the longer you stay silent, not out of anger, but out of awakening, the more they finally start to understand you were never the problem. They just couldn't hold what you were offering. And now they feel the absence of everything they once dismissed. Silence teaches them what their ego refused to learn. Losing someone like you isn't a moment, it's a slow realization that grows heavier with time. You'd be surprised how loud your absence becomes when you finally choose yourself over chasing someone who couldn't meet you where you were. Silence isn't empty. Silence is information. Silence is energy reorganizing itself. And when you stop pouring your heart into someone who kept withdrawing, your silence doesn't punish them. It reveals them. Because here's what most people never understand. Your silence is not a game, not manipulation, not revenge. Your silence is healing. Your silence is you stepping out of the chaos and back into your own body. Your silence is you saying, I'm done negotiating my worth with someone who can't see it. And when you reach that point, that sacred point, where you stop over-explaining, stop over-giving, stop over-trying, something shifts, not just in you, in them, because they were used to the version of you that was always there, always reaching out, always initiating, always soothing the gap they created. They got comfortable with you doing the emotional labor. They got comfortable with you being the one to bridge every silence, fix every distance, patch every crack. But when you finally pause, when you finally take your hands off the connection, when you finally stop trying to carry something they've been dragging, that vacuum speaks louder than anything you could have said. They start to feel something they were never prepared to feel. The weight of your absence, the truth of your value, the reality of what they lost. Not because you slammed a door, not because you made an announcement, not because you try to trigger them, but because healing yourself creates a contrast they can't ignore. Suddenly, your silence isn't avoidance, it's clarity. Your silence isn't giving up, it's self-respect. Your silence isn't coldness, it's wholeness returning to you. Because you didn't disconnect out of spite. You disconnected out of exhaustion. You stopped speaking because they stopped listening. You stopped showing up because they stopped appreciating. You stopped trying because they stopped trying a long time ago. So now, in this quiet space, where your heart is learning to breathe again, this is where their realization begins. Because absence exposes everything presence used to hide. When you stop being available, they finally face how deeply they relied on it. When you stop initiating, they finally see how imbalanced it was. When you stop explaining, they finally sit with the consequences of not paying attention the first time. And here's the part that always hits hardest. Your silence forces them to experience what you lived with for months: confusion, uncertainty, overthinking, the heaviness of not knowing. They finally taste their own behavior, not because you wanted them to hurt, not because you're trying to teach them a lesson, but because healing is a mirror that reflects truth with brutal softness. They feel your absence in places you used to hold together. They feel your silence in moments you used to fill with reassurance. They feel your boundaries in spaces they once took for granted. But the biggest shift, they start realizing the version of you they lost is not the version they'll get back. Because silence doesn't just distance you from them. Silence brings you home to yourself. And when you return to yourself, you don't shrink again. You don't chase again. You don't beg again. You don't abandon yourself to hold someone else steady. You rise, quietly, softly, unapologetically. And that rise is what they feel most, because they expected you to wait, to hold space, to keep the door unlocked, to keep pouring. They didn't expect you to finally choose your peace over their inconsistency. Your silence is not the absence of communication. It's the presence of self-worth. It's you saying, I'm done explaining myself to someone who never tried to understand me. I'm done carrying a connection that I didn't break. I'm done showing up fully for someone who showed up halfway. And when you reach that place, you stop obsessing over whether they'll come back. Because healing shifts your vision. It shifts your appetite. It shifts your capacity. You start wanting different things. You start craving reciprocity, consistency, emotional safety, someone who meets you where you are, instead of asking you to lower your standards, to match their limitations. Healing turns your silence into strength. It turns your distance into clarity. It turns your pause into power. So while they're over there, feeling the absence of the old version of you, you're over here, becoming someone you should have been allowed to be all along. Someone grounded, someone centered, someone whole, someone who no longer chases in exchange for crumbs of affection. And when that happens, your silence doesn't just affect them, it frees you. Because the truth is this: the longer you stay silent, the more you realize who was meant to stay and who was only meant to teach you how much you deserved. Your silence becomes a filter, a revealer, a realignment. It brings the right people closer, and it dissolves the ones who were only held together by your effort. This isn't manipulation. This isn't punishment. This isn't a tactic. This is healing. This is nervous system recovery. This is emotional sovereignty. This is you removing your energy from anything that harms your peace. And ironically, that is exactly why they feel it so deeply, because they never expected that the person who gave the most would eventually stop giving it all. But you did, not because you stopped caring, but because you finally started caring about yourself. And that is the moment everything shifts. Your silence isn't punishment. It isn't a strategy, and it isn't a game. It's what happens when someone's heart has finally had enough noise. It's what happens when your nervous system gets tired of being on high alert. It's what happens when your soul whispers, I can't keep losing pieces of myself, trying to hold on to someone who keeps letting go. Silence isn't you shutting them out. Silence is you letting yourself in. And the moment you commit to that, really commit, something shifts in the space between you and the person who hurt you. They start to feel the absence of your presence, not because you're manipulating them, but because your energy was holding far more weight than you realized. When you were available, they took it for granted. When you reached out, they dismissed it. When you tried to talk, they avoided the conversation. But silence leaves them alone with the truth they've been avoiding. Suddenly, there are no more messages to ignore, no more calls to delay, no more emotional labor from you to fall back on. And for the first time, they feel the gap between how they treated you and what they actually lost. Silence is not the absence of communication, it's the presence of reality. Because when you go quiet, they hear everything they refused to listen to before. They hear the consequences of their own choices. They hear the ache of knowing you're no longer trying. They hear the shift in the energy they once relied on. And even if they don't say a word, they feel it deeply, sharply, uncomfortably, because silence forces them to notice what your voice used to soften. Maybe you used to comfort them, reassure them, talk them down from their fears, their ego, their emotional panic. Maybe you used to send the first message, bridge the misunderstanding, fix what they broke. But when you step back, when you stop rescuing them from the discomfort of their own patterns, they finally meet the version of themselves you've been carrying alone. And that meeting isn't gentle. People don't realize how much stability you provided until they are left with the instability they created. Your silence shows them the imbalance they pretended not to see. It shows them that you were the one initiating connection. You were the one repairing the cracks. You were the one setting the emotional tone. And now, no one is doing that for them. Suddenly, their life feels quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It feels empty. It feels hollow. It feels off because the consistency you brought was something they secretly depended on. And without it, their days feel different. You see, people don't miss you the moment you walk away. They miss you the moment they realize you're not circling back. Silence is the first time they see that truth. And something else happens too, something deeper. Without the noise of the relationship, you start hearing yourself again. You start feeling the weight you've been carrying. That wasn't yours. You start recognizing the effort you were giving. That wasn't being matched. You start understanding that the love you offered was honest, but the space you offered it to wasn't ready to hold it. Your silence becomes a mirror for both of you. For them, a mirror reflecting the consequences of avoidance, ego, immaturity, fear, and emotional neglect. For you, a mirror reflecting your strength, your boundaries, and the way your heart is still capable of healing and opening, just not for someone who didn't know how to receive it. This is why silence isn't manipulation, it's restoration, recentering, reclaiming, because silence is where you learn that peace isn't something they can give you, it's something you choose. When you stop begging to be understood by someone committed to misunderstanding you. And ironically, that's when they understand you most. When the access disappears, when the energy shifts, when your presence becomes memory instead of habit, that's when they finally feel the cost of the comfort you once provided. And yes, some will come back, not because silence tricked them, but because silence revealed truth. It revealed who you were, who they were, what they couldn't see when you were always there, softening the edges. But others won't come back. And that's not a loss. That's clarity. Because silence doesn't just show them who you are, it shows you who they really were. Not the version you hoped for, not the version they performed, but the version they chose. When your love was no longer cushioning them. And when you realize that, when you feel that truth in your bones, something inside you shifts. You stop chasing closure. You stop needing validation. You stop analyzing their silence. Because you are finally at peace with your own. Your silence is your healing, your clarity, your rebirth. And whether they return or stay gone, your silence will have already done what their noise never could. It will have brought you back to yourself. Your silence does something you never expected. It doesn't punish them. It doesn't guilt them. It doesn't teach them a lesson. That was never your intention. Your silence creates space. Space for you to breathe again, to think again, to feel without being overwhelmed, to reconnect with yourself after carrying the emotional weight for both of you. And that shift changes everything. Because when the pressure you held finally drops, you start seeing the truth. You weren't losing them. You were losing yourself, trying to keep them. And when you step back, not to provoke them, not to manipulate them, not to play games, but to heal, to recenter, to reclaim your emotional energy, something happens to them that they don't know how to put into words. Their mind starts replaying every moment they dismissed. Their chest starts tightening in places they always kept numb. Their fears start whispering louder than their pride, because silence removes the safety net they took for granted. They realize you were the steady one, the consistent one, the one who cared, the one who tried, the one who showed up, even when they didn't. And when that presence goes quiet, even gently, even lovingly, they feel the contrast, like a shift in temperature. Your silence isn't the absence of communication, it's the absence of chaos and avoidance. X's, emotionally guarded people. They are used to chaos, but they are not used to losing the one person who grounded them. So they start noticing things. They notice your silence in their mornings. They notice your absence in their routines. They notice the softness of your energy is no longer cushioning their insecurities. They notice that you're no longer available to soothe the very wounds they refuse to face. And without realizing it, they start confronting the one thing they've avoided, the truth, not the truth about you. They always knew your worth. They always felt your value. They always recognized your consistency. But the truth about themselves, about how they ran when they should have leaned in, about how they shut down when they should have opened, about how they withheld when you offered everything. Your silence becomes the mirror they can't escape anymore. Not a weapon, not a tactic, not a punishment. A mirror, a reflection of what it feels like to no longer be prioritized by the person who always chose them. And somewhere in that quiet, they finally face what they never admitted. Losing access to your energy hurts more than losing the relationship did, because the relationship was one thing, but you were the rare part, the irreplaceable part, the part they didn't know they needed, until your absence made it obvious. Your silence creates the awakening their pride never allowed, and your healing becomes the turning point they never saw coming. Not every ex returns. Not every avoidant reconnects. Not every guarded heart opens, but all of them feel it. They feel the shift. They feel the space. They feel the loss of your emotional presence. And most importantly, they feel the difference between being loved by you and being loved by anyone else. Because the truth is simple. Your silence didn't make them miss you. Your silence made them realize who you were the whole time. And that realization is something they'll sit with long after the relationship ends. If this message spoke to something deep inside you, don't forget to like the video so it reaches the people who need these words today. And if you want more healing, more clarity, and more emotional truth, subscribe because we're just getting started.